Who, when and where we vaccinate against COVID-19 is a controversial debate with no easy answers, but Christian Gollier thinks that maybe we can be more specific about the costs and the benefits of the choices we're making. Hello again, Christian.
Hi, Tim.
Now, Christian, we hear a lot about vaccine delays, vaccine prioritization, hesitancy, vaccine passports, vaccine nationalism. They're all discussed in the media, but they're discussed very much as political problems. Would it help if we focused the debate a little bit more on the welfare costs of these policies?
Yes, I mean, today in Europe, but in many other places of the world, there is this question of how to allocate vaccine, what's the cost of reducing the speed, or what's the benefit of accelerating the vaccination campaign. I think it's important to try to estimate the cost and benefits of these different policies. There is a lot of frustration, in particular in continental Europe, about the reduced speed of the vaccination. It's interesting to see what's the consequence of this reduced speed on welfare, and the welfare combined at the same time health consequences, because if we reduce speed, there will be more death, but also the lockdown will have to be stronger and longer, and that has also economic consequences. So I think it's important for economists to try to evaluate the consequence of those things.
But, Christian, when we do this, at least when economists do this, you eventually run into the problem that you have to attribute a value to life, don't you? How have you approached that?
Well, economists have been doing that for at least, the first paper on the value of statistical life is in the early 60s. So it's 60 years ago. And we used to use that kind of approach for many different things. So, for example, in France, we had the decision 4 years ago to reduce the speed limit on roads from 90 kilometers per hour to 80 kilometers per hour. And that came from an evaluation of where we count the number of lives saved through this policy and a large duration of time to go from point A to point B. And when you put values on those things, you get to the result that reducing speed is good. So the difficulty is how can we apply that for a pandemic where we are not talking about a few dozens of lives saved, but we are talking about hundreds of thousands people to be saved or to die. And then we get the light from the public on those questions. So I published a paper in Le Monde last spring, and I used to do that. At that time, it was on the value of life, explaining that politicians have to make decisions where they have to weigh the health consequence of the pandemic and the economic consequence of the pandemic. And if you don't have a way to make compromises between these two objectives, you have a difficulty to defend your position and to justify to the public, but also to potential lawyers, because there will be judgment and there will be political trial after the pandemic about that. It's important to justify your decision, and the only way to do that is to put the value on life. We economists, we evaluate the value of life by looking at how people themselves value their life when they have themselves to make decisions about whether to spend more money to better protect their life, and they do that every day by, for example, reduce their speed on the road, or to change their tire more frequently or less frequently, to do something else with their money. And so that allows us economists to evaluate the value of statistical life, how people themselves are ready to pay, how much people themselves are ready to pay to reduce the probability of dying next day. And so in France, we have an official number of 3 million euros per life saved.
You do this welfare analysis in the paper for France, don't you? Use the standard epidemiological model that we see used all the time. Now, what assumptions are you making in that model?
Yeah, so keep in mind, I've been doing on the pandemic last year and again this year about the vaccination, what I've done and many other economists have done over the last 30 years in an interdisciplinary approach. So I'm talking here about climate change. So economists realizing that the climatologists were not ready to examine the economic consequence of their policy recommendation to reduce emission. So economists have been working on using a climatic model to estimate the consequence of a specific policy in terms of warming and in terms of economic consequence, and then make recommendation about what's the optimal policy. And so we did last spring, we did the same thing for the pandemic. So recognizing that epidemiologists were not ready to put economic module in their which is quite standard over the last 80 years or something like that. They have a standard model they called CEPR model to estimate the consequence of a specific health policy in terms of the dynamics of the pandemic. And they refuse to put a value on life and to estimate the economic consequence of their recommendation. So again, economists have decided to borrow the standard epidemiological model, integrate into that an economic module to make policy recommendation where we put a value on life and we look at the economic consequence, the health consequences of different possible policies. So that's what we did. And so the model, the epidemiological model that we use, the SIR model, is a model where the probability of getting infected when you are susceptible to be infected, the probability of being infected every day depends upon the intensity of your social interaction with others. Some of these others are themselves infected, and there is a probability when you interact with that person to become infected. So it's a model. It's with partial differential equation that we solve numerically, and we examine how reducing the intensity of social interaction through, for example, a lockdown, affect the dynamics of the pandemic. At the same time, it affects the economic crisis. And so we look at that dynamics over 2 or 3 years, depending upon the characteristics of the virus itself. And as you may know, this year the British variant looks much more transmissible, contagious than the original virus, and that forces us to reevaluate the models compared to what we did last year. And as a consequence, hopefully we have this vaccination campaign, because in the face of the British variant, without the vaccination campaign, it would be that the optimal policy would require a very strong lockdown, and hopefully we have the vaccine to reduce the intensity of the lockdown or duration of the lockdown, because we will create herd immunity soon enough to allow people to get back to their freedom.
Well, let's have a look at that, because one of the things that you do the welfare analysis on is the pace of the vaccine rollout. Leaving aside the controversy that there has been in Europe about who promised they would supply how many vaccines, what is the effect of the pace of vaccine rollout when you look at it in a welfare analysis?
Okay, so indeed, it's given the very low cost of the vaccine, in particular the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is extremely cheap. It's €3 per dose. So it's incredibly cheap compared to the benefits. So the benefits are so strong of the vaccination campaign that, of course, if we could accelerate the vaccination campaign, that would be better. Okay, no doubt. But the good news is that if we could already vaccinate the 15 or 21% of the population, the people who are the most vulnerable to be hospitalized or to die from the virus, if we could be able to quickly vaccinate this specific proportion of the population, most of the problem would be solved. So that's the good news. The good news is even if the speed of vaccination is slow, if you are able to concentrate the vaccination on the specific target of the people who are the most likely to die or to be hospitalized if they are infected, you will be able to free the economy before necessarily vaccinating everybody. And why is it the case? It's because this virus has the specificity to be very dangerous for a small proportion of the population. For the young people, don't die. I mean, the probability of dying if infected is 1,000 is 1,000 larger if you are older than 65 than if you are younger than 18. So you see, if we would be able to vaccinate quickly those most vulnerable people, you will solve most of the problem because not many people will die anymore, even if the virus continues to circulate in the population. And moreover, because the vulnerable people are also those who are the most likely to be in ICU units if they are infected, you will be able to smooth or to flatten the curve of ICU capacity utilization, which is the current criteria to determine the intensity of the lockdown. So as soon as you vaccinate these people, the ICU, the hospitals will be not anymore overwhelmed as they are currently in France, and so you will be able to reduce the lockdown, and therefore you will free the economy and you will reduce the economic cost of the pandemic at the same time as the number of people dying from the virus will go down very quickly. So you see that what is important is the first 20% of the population to be vaccinated, and we are almost done with that in France and in continental Europe. So we need to still impose some degree of lockdown for a few weeks, but in May it will be over. Some people will continue to die, of course. Well, if we could vaccinate everybody, that would be better, but that's difficult. But most of the benefits of the vaccine campaign will already be obtained with a 20% vaccination rate, 20% vaccination target.
You have also done the analysis to look at delays in this, delays in getting it started or pauses. You could look at this, I suppose, as the penalty of slow decision making, perhaps. Well, what is the welfare effect of a delay?
Okay, so there are two reasons for making this examination. The first one is indeed in France we delayed the start of the vaccination campaign. One reason for that is that in France in particular we have a lot of skepticism about the vaccines, and so I think the government had this idea that it would be better to let other countries start the vaccination to check whether there are side effects that are important that would justify not using the vaccine. And so that was the first reason I examined that. There was, at the time I was written the paper, it was end of March 2021, we had this AstraZeneca doubts about the danger of the vaccine in terms of thrombosis and blood clots. And so in France and in many other countries of continental Europe, they decided to freeze the vaccination campaign related to AstraZeneca. And in France, AstraZeneca vaccine represented 50% of the dose distributed at that time. So for 1 week, we just froze the vaccination campaign for 50% of the doses. So it's interesting that if you freeze that, I mean, as I told you, you postpone the benefits of having a larger proportion of the population having immunity. So you force the economy to be locked down for a longer duration and for a stronger intensity. At the same time, where more people will die because delaying vaccination imply more people will die. So it's, and of course there may be benefits of freezing the vaccination if you have some doubt about the quality and the dangerousness of the side effect of the vaccine, and nobody knows at this stage what's the benefit of this freeze, but the cost is clear. I mean, my model is able to estimate the cost of the freeze, and currently, my estimation is that for a full 1 week delay in the vaccination end of March in France, the cost is two dimension: death toll. 1,500 people will die specifically because of the delay for the remaining duration of the pandemic, and there will be an additional 0.3% GDP loss, which corresponds for France of 8 billion euros. So 1 week delay in the vaccination campaign end of March mean 1.5 thousand people die, additional death, and 8 billion euros additional economic cost. So that, and I don't tell we should not freeze or delay the vaccine. I just say I don't know the benefits of the delay, but here are the costs, okay, and they are not small.
Can we also put similar types of numbers on the cost of France's strong anti-vaccine sentiment?
The presence of anti-vaccine people, anti-vaxxers, is in France particularly strong. France is the country of the world with the largest proportion of the population being skeptical about vaccine. And in December, more than 50%, I think it was 65% of the French population was hesitant, reluctant to get the vaccine. And so that's probably why the French government was not very strong in speeding the vaccination campaign at that time. So the problem of anti-vaxxers is, well, for the economy as a whole, it's a problem because more people will continue to occupy IC units, spend time in the hospital. Some of them will die, and because it will take more time to get herd immunity. Herd immunity can come from people being infected and recover from their infection, and hopefully the mortality rate is 1.5% or 1% globally, and so most people survive. But they create herd immunity together with the vaccination. So if less people accept to get vaccinated, it will take more time to create herd immunity, and therefore the lockdown will be longer, more intense, and cost more to the economy. And on top of that more people will die. There is, however, externality associated to that, because when you refuse to get the vaccine, you not only expose yourself to the virus and to die from the virus, and many anti-vaxxers will die because of that, but also you can become a vector of transmission of the virus, and in that case, people in favor of the vaccine will die because of that, because they will get infected before being able to get the immunization from the vaccine. And I evaluate that something like 5,000 elder people will die, not pro-vaxxer will die because of the presence of 30% anti-vaxxers in the French population. There is, however, one good thing for the presence of anti-vaxxers, that is younger people. Younger people who want to get the vaccine will get the vaccine earlier because other people will not want to get the vaccine. So there is a positive effect. So people between the age of middle-aged people, 5 of them would have died in the absence of anti-vaxxers, and they will survive because they will get the vaccine early enough, because elder people, anti-vaxxers, will not want to get the vaccine, and so the dose will be transferred to these people. So there is cost and benefits. Most of the costs will be borne by the anti-vaxxers themselves. They will die because they just refuse to get the vaccine, and the virus is quite lethal.
On a more hypothetical level, you did an analysis as well of extreme vaccine nationalism, didn't you? And it's compared two different Frances, effectively.
Yeah, so I just did the simple talk experiment of to estimate the global welfare cost of vaccine nationalism. I mean, there are many costs associated to that kind of nationalism, because you will block the chain of production of the vaccine if different countries control different part of that chain. But I do not examine that. What I examine is the fact that if the vaccine are not attributed by priority in the world to the people who are the most likely to die from it, it's inefficient. Okay, it would be better to live in a world, on a planet, where we vaccine all the most vulnerable people before we allocate the vaccine to people who are less vulnerable to the vaccine. So what I did, I just compared two Frances, indeed, one which has a production capacity for the vaccine, and one who was not, and is forced to import the vaccine. And I compare two solutions. One solution where the two Frances first allocate the vaccine to their population of elders, and another solution where the country with the vaccine first start to vaccinate its entire population before exporting the vaccine to the other country. And the consequence of that is that many more people will die at the level of the two Frances, and the cost of the pandemic globally will be much larger. So the point is, so the national vaccine nationalism is extremely costly, but it's very hard to go against that, because when you look at the destiny of the two countries in terms of the global death toll and the economic consequence of the pandemic, at the end of the pandemic, you see that the one country with the vaccination capacity has such a larger global benefit compared to the other country who has not, and has to wait the first to get full vaccination, that I don't believe that there is the World Health Organization would be strong enough to impose to the countries with the vaccination capacity to accept altruistically to redistribute the vaccine to the vulnerable people of the other country. To get it simple, it's make no sense to vaccinate the young British people before the elders in Germany, in France, and that's a problem.
The numbers in your analysis they're big numbers. They're in the thousands. They're in percentages of GDP. Does this make you think the policymakers in France or any other equivalent country, or the political class, should be revisiting their policy decisions now?
Well, again, if we could be able to accelerate the vaccination, I mean, the economics and health consequence and benefits of this action would be extremely large, as you said. I mean, it's in the tens of percent of GDP. It's in the tens of thousands of lives saved for different policy consideration. And so the aim of this paper was just to put numbers and numbers, I mean bad numbers, on lives saved or lives lost, and GDP gain or GDP loss. Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, all those things are political decisions, but it's good to have economists try to put numbers on the consequence of the political decision. Of course, those models are just models, and they should be taken with a grain of salt. At the same time, it's enlightened the debate, and I think it's useful. And I must say that what we did as economists last year, and with the epidemiologists, what we did last year, using models to make predictions. In fact, those predictions was quite good. I mean, what we observed corresponded to the prediction. So those models are useful. They are not the unique things to consider when we look at policy shaping, because there are other considerations. I mean, for example, this question of should we allow people who are vaccinated to get freed and not facing the constraint that people not vaccinated should face in order to limit the circulation of the virus. It's not only economics and health policy; it's also philosophical, moral. I mean, limiting freedom is something very dangerous in democracy.
Well, let's hope that the policymakers are continuing to pay attention to the evidence, however it's presented, and especially the sorts of evidence that we get from welfare analysis. Christian, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Tim. Bye.
If you want to find out more about the methods and all the numbers as well, the paper's called The Welfare Cost of Vaccine Misallocation, Delays and Nationalism. It's in COVID Economics 74. Well, thanks for watching again. Remember, you get all the latest research into the impact of COVID-19 in COVID economics. It's free and open access at CEPR.org.